All right, welcome to today's explainer. I am so glad you're here because today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating and honestly a highly frustrating biological puzzle. We are looking at why the human body, which, is this amazing machine built to adapt and get stronger, why it sometimes just actively rejects fitness. We are unpacking the overtraining mystery. So, picture this. You've got a highly dedicated athlete. They're grinding through workouts, putting in the hours, doing everything right. But then, out of nowhere, their performance just falls off a cliff. And it's not just that they're running a bit slower or lifting a little less weight. They're getting hit with these bizarre, full-body symptoms. We're talking debilitating insomnia, sudden bouts of depression, totally losing their appetite. The question is, at what point does pushing your physical limits stop building you up and start literally breaking you down? To figure that out, we've got to go back to the basics.
Section 1. The Overload Principle.
To really grasp how devastating the abnormal state of overtraining is, we first have to agree on what a normal baseline of training looks like, right? The overload principle says we have to stress the body beyond its comfort levels. This isn't just about getting a good sweat going. It's a biological necessity. When you tweak your training variables, your exercise selection, your weights, your volume, you are throwing a very specific stimulus at your body. And that stimulus forces neurological, structural, and hormonal adaptations. You literally have to break comfort to build capacity.
You can think of this process kind of like a staircase. Step 1, you train hard, and that creates acute fatigue. Then, step 2, because you're fatigued, you actually see a temporary reduction in performance. You're physically weaker right after a grueling workout. But then we hit step 3, which is where the magic happens. With a little rest, your body rebounds, it adapts, and your functional capabilities shoot up past your old pre-training baseline. In the sports science world, this healthy, successful staircase effect is what we call functional overreaching.
Section 2. The overtraining trap. So what happens when that super delicate balancing act of manipulating variables gets messed up and you skip the rest? Well, we see a really stark contrast. On one side, we've got functional overreaching, that short-term fatigue that gives us a positive adaptation like we just talked about. But on the other side, we have non-functional overreaching. This is the danger zone. This is when your body mounts the exact same neurological and hormonal stress responses to the workout, but you just don't give it the rest it desperately needs to adapt. So instead of bouncing up that staircase, your performance suffers. Those hard-earned adaptations are lost. You're basically digging yourself a hole, and climbing out of it is going to require prolonged rest.
Let's actually track how this spiraling timeline plays out biologically. Acute fatigue? That lasts for days. Functional overreaching might take a few days or weeks to rebound from. But if you ignore the warning signs and push straight into non-functional overreaching, you are suddenly looking at weeks of mandatory rest. And if you let that process go completely unchecked, boom, you crash right into full-blown overtraining syndrome, or OTS, where just getting back to your baseline performance can take months.
Section 3. A century-old medical mystery.
Overtraining syndrome isn't just some modern fitness buzzword. It's actually a physiological cold case that sports scientists have been trying to crack for over 90 years. Historically, researchers tried to solve this by rounding up the usual suspects, essentially dividing OTS into two completely different models, based on the autonomic nervous system. On one side, they proposed sympathetic OTS. They usually saw this in anaerobic sports with way too much high-intensity training, leaving the athlete restless, highly excited, and irritable. On the flip side, they proposed parasympathetic OTS, which typically hit endurance athletes dealing with excessive volume, making them feel lethargic, apathetic, and depressed.
But the reality on the ground? It's much, much messier. The universal symptoms are just all over the map. Insomnia, a bizarre loss of physical power, totally altered resting heart rates, generalized heavy fatigue, deep irritability, and a total loss of motivation to do the sport you used to love. Try to empathize with that for a second. This is definitely not just tired muscles. It's a massive systemic breakdown. And because these symptoms vary so wildly from person to person, those old black and white sympathetic versus parasympathetic models just couldn't explain the whole picture.
Section 4. The body as a network.
So if those traditional sports science models fell short because they relied on simple cause and effect, what's the actual answer here? Well, I absolutely love this quote from the journal Frontiers in Network Physiology. It says, complex systems in nature are not aptly characterized using the classic scientific method, simplifying complex problems into single variables. The massive takeaway here is that we aren't going to find a single overtraining biomarker, because the human body is not a simple machine. It's an unbelievably intricate, nonlinear web of interdependencies. OTS is a complex systems phenomenon.
To really wrap our heads around this today, researchers are using a totally cutting-edge approach called transomics. Instead of just isolating one hormone, like cortisol, or looking at one damaged muscle fiber, they're using machine learning to map out comprehensive networks. They are looking at how your genome, your epigenome, your proteins, and your metabolism are all communicating and failing together. It's this incredibly massive landscape view of full-body fatigue.
And guys, here is where this complex network approach delivers a huge wow moment. When scientists mapped out these networks, they found these absolutely shocking parallels between overtraining syndrome and major depression. Seriously, both conditions require weeks to months of rest. Both feature profound dysfunctions in the HPA axis, which is basically your body's stress control center. Both of them trigger heavy immune system and cytokine inflammation responses. And both actually cause epigenetic modifications, meaning they are essentially reprogramming your genes in response to chronic stress. It's wild.
And because OTS is a complex systems failure, the overtraining might not even be entirely coming from the gym. Non-exercise stressors play a massive role here. Insufficient calories or carbohydrates, which is known as relative energy deficiency in sport, or RES, that's a huge trigger. Poor sleep, major psychosocial stress at work or home, excessive cognitive effort, even shifts in your gut bacteria, your intestinal microbiota. Every single one of these things pulls on the exact same physiological web as your heavy deadlifts or your 20-mile runs.
Section 5. The Road to Recovery. So, when that entire biological web finally just collapses under the combined weight of exercise and life stress, how do we fix it? Well, I want this number to really sink in. 4 to 12. That is the sobering number of weeks, and quite frequently months, that it typically takes an athlete to bounce back from true overtraining syndrome. You literally cannot foam roll your way out of a complex systems failure.
The cure has to be completely individualized and highly holistic. Step 1, absolute rest and a massive reduction in training volume. Step 2 usually involves bringing in a sports dietitian to optimize caloric and carbohydrate intake and fix any of those underlying energy deficiencies. Step 3 is entirely mental. You literally have to just wait for that genuine excitement and motivation for your sport to come back. And only then, in Step 4, can you carefully test the waters with a few longer or harder sessions. It requires profound patience.
We have covered a ton of ground in today's explainer, from the basic overload principle all the way to the absolute bleeding edge of network physiology. So I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on regarding your own routine. The next time you feel completely, utterly exhausted after a workout, ask yourself, is your fatigue just a stepping stone to your next great adaptation, or are you looking at the very first crack in a complex systemic breakdown? Listen to your body, respect the rest, and train smart. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.